So today we're in the oldest part of the cemetery, or one of the oldest parts of the cemetery. This is the city section, the section where the pauper, or what they would consider originally to be the poor people, were buried, although there are some very rich people buried in the pauper section. This is Frances Henderson. She is believed to be one of the oldest people buried in the cemetery. She died in 1867 and was originally buried elsewhere. When the cemetery opened up, they relocated her here. This is James Glead. James Glead is a Civil War veteran. After the war, he married and had several children before he ventured west with his wife and young children. When they came west, they settled in the Yakima Valley in what's called Yakima City, now Union Gap. They stayed there for a short time before he was able to make his soldier's claim in what was known as Last Chance Valley. On Christmas Day, they loaded up their wagon with all their belongings and their children and crossed the Yakima River to get to Last Chance Valley, which was actually what we know now as Gleed. The area was named after him. Once he was there, they settled in their small home, and he raised cattle. He had a creamery. His creamer was a dog-ran paddled creamer that he ordered from across the United States. They also had a lot of alfalfa, and he was well known as possibly being the first person to have a tree farm, not as in fruit trees, but actually other trees. There was a law that read if you planted a certain amount of trees within a certain amount of years, you could receive extra acreage, and that's what he did. So this is the Chaney family plot. The Chaneys have a very interesting connection with history throughout the state of Washington. Martha Chaney was originally Martha McAllister. She immigrated west with her family as a very young girl. They ended up over in western Washington where she grew up. Her father, James McAllister, and her mother, Charlotte, had several children when they came. Her father and one of her brothers became soldiers in the Indian War in Washington, the very first Indian War. Her father was the first casualty of that war. Her brother was shot on the same day as her father. They ended up taking the rest of the family to a fort over there where they stayed until they could bring her father's body in. Martha was only married to her first husband, Mr. Bunting, for a month at the time of her father's death. After her father was murdered and brought back to the fort and buried, they found his murder, and her husband actually ended up shooting her father's killer. They then moved to Yakima Valley with their known children, and one of her daughters was named Blanche. Blanche got married after she came to the valley to Mr. Perkins. Ironically, after their marriage, they were in the White Bluffs area traveling back to Yakima to visit family when they were murdered by Yakima Indians. After a long, tumultuous capture of various people, the murder resulted in the hanging of 2 Native Americans outside the courthouse in Union Gap. They are the only legal hangings to ever occur in Yakima County. Blanche Perkins and her husband are also buried in the graveyard in Union Gap, but her mother is buried here. Thanks for joining us today in the city section at Tahoma Cemetery. Join us on our upcoming adventures as we take you through some of the other historic areas of the cemetery as well as some of the more modern ones. I'm Ellen Almendinger. Thanks for joining us.